falling for a nurse while facing the end, my love story takes an unexpected turn. I never expected to end up in the hospital, let alone falling in love with someone while I was here. Life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect them. It all started about 6 months ago. I was living a pretty normal life for a 32-year-old, working a steady job in IT, hanging out with friends on weekends, and slowly building the future I had always imagined. I wasn't exactly content, but I was comfortable. I had a few regrets, of course. Doesn't everyone? I sometimes thought about the relationship that fell apart last year, the one where I was so close to proposing but just couldn't pull the trigger. But I was moving on, figuring things out, when life threw me a curveball. I had been feeling tired for weeks, more than just the usual work fatigue. I was out of breath after climbing a single flight of stairs, and every now and then, a deep, bone-aching pain would grip my chest. I told myself it was stress, or maybe I just needed to start working out again. It wasn't until I fainted at my desk one day that I finally saw a doctor. The news hit me like a freight train: terminal cancer. Not the slow kind that gives you years to prepare, but the aggressive kind that means I'm lucky if I get 6 months. I remember sitting in the doctor's office, staring at the pattern on the floor tiles, trying to process the words coming out of his mouth. Terminal. No cure. 6 months. Maybe less. It felt like someone had reached inside me and yanked out my future. Everything I had been working toward, buying a house, moving up in my career, maybe even finding love again, none of it mattered anymore. I was 32, and I was dying. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, endless tests, and meeting with specialists who confirmed the same grim prognosis. My world shrank to the size of those sterile hospital rooms, filled with the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines beeping quietly in the background. I went through the motions like a zombie, numb to everything. My family was supportive but devastated, and my friends, well, they didn't know what to say. Neither did I. That's when I met Sarah. It was during one of my early chemo sessions. I was sitting in one of those uncomfortable recliners, trying to distract myself by scrolling through my phone. I wasn't paying much attention when she first walked into the room, but when she spoke, something in her voice caught my attention. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she said, her tone warm and upbeat. "I'll be your nurse today. How are you feeling?" I looked up and saw her smiling down at me, her blonde hair tied back in a neat ponytail, and those clear blue eyes filled with a kind of genuine concern that I hadn't encountered much lately. She was young, probably around my age, but there was something about her that felt so steady, so sure. I gave her the usual response, a half-hearted "I'm fine," even though we both knew that was a lie. But there was something about the way she looked at me that made me want to be honest, to tell her that I was scared out of my mind, that I didn't know how I was going to get through this. But I didn't. Instead, I just watched as she went about her work, setting up the fourth, checking my vitals, making small talk that I barely registered. But she had this way of making even the most mundane conversation feel like it mattered, like she actually cared about how I was doing beyond the standard nurse-patient interaction. That first meeting was brief, but it left an impression on me. Over the next few weeks, Sarah became a constant presence in my life. She was assigned to my case, so she was there for every chemo session, every checkup, every time I needed something. At first, it was just professional, but as the days passed, our conversations became more personal. She would ask me about my life before all of this, what I did for work, what I liked to do for fun, if I had any family nearby. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone else. It wasn't just that she was easy to talk to, though she was. It was more than that. She had this way of making me feel seen, like I was more than just another dying patient in a hospital bed. I learned a lot about her, too. Sarah had been a nurse for 5 years, and she loved her job. She told me about how she'd always wanted to be in the medical field, how she felt like it was her calling to help people. She talked about her family, her 2 younger brothers who drove her crazy but who she adored. She mentioned that she had a dog, a big, goofy Labrador named Max who she loved to take on hikes when she had the time. One day, after a particularly grueling session where the nausea had been almost unbearable, Sarah came by my room during her break. She didn't have to, her shift was technically over, but she sat with me for a while, talking about nothing and everything. She told me about a classic movie marathon she'd watched the weekend before and how she could quote every line from Casablanca. I laughed for the first time in weeks when she did a terrible impression of Humphrey Bogart. That's when I started to realize what was happening. I was falling for her. I didn't want to. It felt wrong, somehow, to be thinking about love when I was dying. What could I possibly offer someone like her? But it was more than just attraction, it was the way she made me feel. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt like I wasn't just existing. I was living, even if just in those brief moments with her. As the weeks went by, I found myself looking forward to my appointments, not because I enjoyed the treatments, but because it meant I would see Sarah. I started to notice little things about her, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the way she always hummed softly to herself when she was focused, the way she made every patient feel like they were the most important person in the world. It wasn't just her kindness, though that was a big part of it. It was her strength, her resilience. Sarah had seen so much pain and suffering in her job, but she never let it harden her. Instead, she used it as fuel to be better, to do more for the people in her care. I admired her, respected her, and more than anything, I wanted to tell her how I felt. But every time I tried, the words got stuck in my throat. How do you tell someone you're falling for them when you know your time is running out? How do you ask someone to care about you when you know you won't be around to reciprocate? It felt selfish, and I couldn't bring myself to put that burden on her. So I kept it to myself, content with the time we spent together, even if it was just as patient and nurse. I convinced myself that it was enough, that I didn't need anything more. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. And then, last week, everything came to a head. It had been a rough day, one of the worst I'd had since starting treatment. The pain was excruciating, radiating from my chest and spreading through my entire body. The doctors had given me stronger painkillers, but they barely took the edge off. I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. Sarah was there, as always, but this time I couldn't hide how I was feeling. The fear, the sadness, the hopelessness, it all came pouring out. I don't know how much longer I can do this, I admitted, my voice trembling. I'm so tired, Sarah. I'm so scared. She sat down beside me, taking my hand in hers. I know, she said softly. I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm here for you. Whatever you need, I'm here. And that's when I blurted it out. I've fallen. For you, Sarah. I didn't mean to, but I have. You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time, and I don't know what to do about it. She looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, I thought I'd made a huge mistake, that I'd ruined everything. But then she squeezed my hand and smiled, a sad, bittersweet smile. I'm flattered, she said, her voice gentle. But you know this can't go anywhere, right? I care about you, too. More than I probably should. But you're sick, and my job is to take care of you, not to get involved. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I knew she was right, but hearing it still hurt. I know, I whispered. I just needed to tell you. I needed you to know how much you mean to me. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You mean a lot to me, too. More than you'll ever know. We sat there in silence for a while, holding hands, neither of us knowing what to say. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint beeping of the machines around me. Eventually, she had to leave, other patients needed her, and life went on, even if. I wasn't sure how much time had passed after Sarah left. My mind was a jumble of emotions, and the pain seemed to ebb and flow like the tide. But I was grateful for her honesty, for the way she had handled my confession with such grace. The days that followed were a mix of physical pain and emotional turbulence. Sarah continued to be my nurse, and our interactions were a delicate balance of professionalism and personal connection. She was always kind, always attentive, but there was an underlying sadness that lingered in her eyes whenever she spoke to me. I could tell that my admission had affected her deeply, and though I wished I could take it back to spare her pain, I was also grateful for the truth of it. As my condition worsened, the hospital room became more like a sanctuary than a place of treatment. It was filled with photos of family and friends, cards of encouragement, and sometimes flowers. But it was Sarah's presence that became the most comforting part of my day. Despite everything, I looked forward to her visits, cherishing each moment of normalcy and human connection. One afternoon, as I lay in bed, feeling particularly exhausted, Sarah came in with a small, neatly wrapped package. It was a gesture that seemed so out of place in the clinical environment of the hospital that it immediately caught my attention. I brought you something, she said softly, setting the package on the bedside table. It's not much, but I thought you might like it. I looked at her, puzzled. You didn't have to get me anything, Sarah. Just being here is enough. She smiled, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and warmth. I wanted to open it. I unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small, leather-bound journal. It was beautifully crafted, with a simple, elegant design. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's a journal," Sarah explained. "I thought you might want to write down your thoughts, your memories. I know it's not much, but sometimes putting things on paper can help." I was deeply moved. It wasn't just the journal itself, but the fact that Sarah had taken the time to choose something so personal, so meaningful. I looked up at her, my voice catching in my throat. "Thank you, Sarah. This means more to me than you know." She nodded, her smile tinged with a touch of sadness. "You're welcome. I wish I could do more, but I hope this helps you in some way." That evening, after Sarah had left for the day, I took the journal out and began writing. I started with simple observations about the hospital room, the view from the window, the way the light changed as the day turned to night. But soon, my writing became more reflective. I wrote about my fears, my regrets, and the unexpected joy of meeting Sarah. Writing in the journal became a way for me to cope with my emotions, to make sense of everything that was happening. It was a way to leave something behind, a record of my thoughts and feelings, and perhaps a small legacy for those who would read it after I was gone. As my condition continued to decline, the hospital became more like a second home. The staff was attentive, and my family visited as often as they could. But it was Sarah who remained my constant, my anchor in the storm. Even on the hardest days, she managed to bring a glimmer of hope and warmth into my life. One morning, I woke up to find Sarah sitting by my bedside, her expression more serious than usual. She had a small, folded piece of paper in her hand. "I wanted to give you this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a letter from me. I thought you might want to read it." I took the letter, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. Inside, Sarah had written a heartfelt message, expressing her gratitude for the time we had spent together and her admiration for my strength and courage. She spoke of how much I had inspired her and how deeply she had come to care about me. "I know this is a difficult time," the letter read, "and I wish there was more I could do. But please know that you have touched my life in ways I can't even fully describe. I will carry the memories of our time together with me always." I could barely see the words through my tears. The letter was a beautiful and painful reminder of the connection we had forged, even amidst the sorrow. "Sarah," I said softly, my voice breaking, "thank you for everything. Your kindness has meant more to me than I can say." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm just glad I could be here for you. You've been an amazing patient, and I feel honored to have been a part of your journey." The days grew shorter and my strength continued to wane. I spent my time reflecting on my life, writing in the journal Sarah had given me, and cherishing the moments of connection with my family and friends. I tried to find peace with the reality of my situation, knowing that my time was running out. Eventually, the end came quietly. I was surrounded by loved ones, and Sarah was there, as always, providing comfort and support. It was a peaceful departure, the kind I had hoped for, and I took solace in the knowledge that I had made the most of the time I had left. In the days following my death, my family and friends found the journal I had kept. They read through my thoughts and reflections, discovering the depth of my feelings for Sarah and the impact she had made on my life. It was a small comfort to know that my story would continue to be told, even after I was gone. Sarah wrote me a letter to include with the journal, thanking me for the opportunity to be a part of my life and expressing her continued respect and affection. It was a touching tribute, a final gesture of the bond we had shared. As I reflect on my life now, I find peace in knowing that I loved and was loved in return, even in the most unexpected of circumstances. Sarah's presence in my life was a gift, and though our time together was brief, it was filled with meaning and connection. In the end, life is unpredictable, and sometimes the most profound experiences come in the most unlikely places. I fell in love with a nurse while I was dying, and though our story had a bittersweet ending, it was one that I wouldn't trade for anything.